See if I've got it in here.
About 10 weeks after arriving in Australia, let's go back a bit. I started work within a few days and worked in the local garage for Mr. Arthur Martyr. I was paid £6.10 a week the first week, and on the second week he increased my wages to £7. I felt very good about this. I was paid by cheque, and so I banked it in our savings account and drew out enough to see us through the week. About 3 days later I was told to present my passbook to the local post office agency, where I was told the cheque had been returned. I was told to return the cheque to Mr. Martyr, which I found embarrassing, but he just said okay, took the cheque and gave me the cash. This was a fairly regular weekly occurrence for the entire 6 months I worked there. About 10 weeks after arriving in Australia, our second daughter Jennifer was born on December the 9th at Kiora Private Hospital in Regent, Melbourne. The sad part was that Auntie May was not interested in the baby, and most of the time Jenny was kept in the bedroom. From about this time we felt unwanted, and Betty became very homesick, particularly as she had no family to show the baby to. Aunt May and Uncle Ben offered us a block of land if we wanted to build a house. We accepted their offer, and so we bought the local South Morang Hall, pulled it down and rebuilt it on the block. It was pretty basic, but at least it was ours, and we spent many happy hours working on it. On a few occasions we asked for the block to be surveyed and title granted to us, but we were told not to worry about it and to use the money it would cost to buy things for the house. I was then offered a position at Yan Yin Dairies in charge of pasteurising the milk, which we supplied to all the Melbourne hospitals. This meant a ride on my bicycle of about 7 miles each way. The milk was brought in from local farms twice a day. It was tested for the fat content, and after treatment was placed in 12.5 gallon cans ready for delivery. During the spring and summer this was done again in the evening, which meant bike rides twice a day. In the autumn and winter the milk still collected twice a day, but only put through the cooler and was then treated next morning. After a few months of cycling up and back twice a day I got a car, my first. It was a 1926 Capital Model Chev, and we thought it was wonderful. After we'd been in our house a few months we sponsored Vi and Reg Malcolmson to migrate out to us. At this time I was working 7 days a week, as we could not get anyone to relieve me. And finally Vi and Reg finally arrived with their 2 daughters, Margaret and Evelyn. I got Reg a job at the dairy, and the next morning where am I? I've lost for a moment. Back again. So after a few weeks training I was able to get some time off. We all lived and worked together very happily, but sadly found Aunt May was very difficult. Uncle Ben was a very interesting man, but as he worked in Melbourne he didn't see how we were being treated. People who had met on the boat came over to spend a holiday with us and offered to get me a job in Burnie, Tasmania, where they lived. As Reg and Vi had by this time moved into a house by themselves and we were becoming more and more unhappy and dissatisfied, we decided to take our friends' advice and move to Burnie, Tasmania, where I obtained a position as a chip handling attendant at the Burnie Board factory, which produced wallboard. After 12 months I was promoted to forming machine operator and was responsible for forming the wet lap prior to being pressed into Burnie board. I remained in that position for 4 years. When we arrived in Burnie, the only accommodation we could get was a bus that had been converted into a camper, and by this time we had our 3rd daughter, Sue, who was born at Kiora Hospital in Victoria, the same hospital where her sister Jenny was born. As I was working shift work, it was very difficult to get to sleep during the day. It was coming on winter, and was very wet and cold, and to make matters worse, the roof leaked and all 3 of the girls went down with whooping cough. We called the company doctor, who happened to be the local medical health officer, and he was horrified at the conditions we were living under. We told him we had applied for a commission home and had been told there was quite a long waiting list. He said he would put us on the urgent list, and within a matter of weeks we were granted a new home at Upper Burney. And in 1955 our family was once again increased when our daughter Cheryl was born. Unfortunately, when Cheryl was only 6 weeks old, Betty had to go back in the hospital with complications arising from the birth. This caused some problems, as I was still working shift work and needed some assistance with the girls. Our friends and neighbours were very good. The two eldest girls went to one family, and Susan and Cheryl went to two other homes. And so I was kept busy visiting all the children, plus visiting Betty in hospital. One good thing that came out of all this was that Betty became very friendly with another patient named Mrs. Nichols, who with her family owned a dairy farm at Marrawall on the northwest coast, and over the next couple of years we spent many happy days visiting on their farm. As well as their farm, they had a fisherman's shack right down at the water's edge. And we often went down and enjoyed a few days fishing, and on one occasion I went with three of my friends for the weekend, hoping to catch a few crayfish. On the first night we caught enough for us all to have a good feed the next day, and then on the second night we had been fishing about an hour with no luck when one of my mates said, "I got something," and when he pulled up the net he had about 5 crays. And then we all started to catch some, and in the space of about 1.5 hours we had about 90. And so we said, "That's enough," and we packed up and headed back to Burney. It was in the early hours of the morning when we got home, and we spent several hours cooking our catch, and we and our neighbours had some really good feeds of crayfish. At other times on summer evenings the whole neighbourhood would meet on the beach at Smithton, and we would drag fishing nets along in water up to our necks, and while we were doing that the ladies would light fires, and as the fish were scaled and cleaned we would grill them over the open fires. This with a few drinks and good company made for some wonderful evenings. One very worrying time we had was when we were heading home after spending a day at Blythe Edge, and the 3 older girls were in the back seat. The car was a Pontiac, and Betty was nursing Cheryl in the front seat. And we had just crossed the bridge over the Blythe River when there was a loud bang and a rush of air, and the 2 girls started yelling that Sue had fallen out of the car. By the time I stopped the car, 2 cars had pulled up, and as I raced back I could see this crumpled heap in the middle of the road, and I was terrified what I was going to find. But as I bent over her, she started to cry, and the relief I felt was indescribable. As we had been to the beach, all she was wearing was bathers and a red cardigan, and the back of the cardigan was completely gone. We rushed her to the hospital, and after being kept in overnight, she was discharged the next day with only a few cuts and bruises. After we had been in Tasmania a couple of years, our friend Reg and Vi Malcolmson came to live in Launceston, and we were able to visit them and renew our friendship. In 1955, the Burney Board Company announced that they would build another board mill in Bundamba, Ipswich, Queensland, and then in 1957 I was asked if I would go to Ipswich as shift foreman to assist with getting the mill into production. After some serious thought we decided to accept the position, as other than a few friends we had no ties in Burney. 4 of us decided to go, Les Smart and myself as shift foreman, and Rex Collins and Don Maul as operators. We were all supplied with new homes, our furniture was taken up, and all our removal expenses were paid. We all finished at the Burney Mill when it closed down for the Christmas maintenance. As all our furniture was gone, Betty and I and the girls spent 3 nights at the Bayview Hotel, but at last we were on the plane and heading for Melbourne, and so our time in Tasmania was over. We had a few days in Melbourne, then on to Sydney for a few more days, and finally we arrived in Brisbane, where we were met by the mill manager and the company secretary and taken to the Palais Royal Hotel in Ipswich, where we stayed for a few days until we could get our new home ready. The temperature was 99 degrees, and that evening we had our first taste of a tropical thunderstorm and we began to wonder what we had let ourselves in for.
Yes, I'm back on again now. Oh, now I've got to stop again, the phone's going. There we are. Where is it, over there beside you?